Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1243 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today I'll be speaking with Den. He is 31 years old from Germany. He's had type 1 diabetes for 27 years. Did a lot of MDI actually for 25 years, but he's recently got a pump and become very active in the do-it-yourself community. We're going to get to know Den, and then the second half of the episode is pretty specifically about iAPS, which is a do-it-yourself algorithm. Nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan. Hey everyone, I need you. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. Head over, join the registry, complete the survey. Should take you about 10 minutes. They're looking for type 1s and caregivers of type 1s who are U.S. residents to complete this survey. When you complete the survey, it helps type 1 diabetes research significantly. I can't stress enough that your time will be well spent at t1dexchange.org/juicebox completing that survey. Simple survey. You'll know the answers. No stress. And if you have a chance, check out the private Facebook group, Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes on Facebook. Today's episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Touched by Type 1, touchedbytype1.org. Check them out on Facebook, Instagram, and go to touchedbytype1.org to learn everything about what they're doing, including their big event coming up this September in Orlando. Absolutely free to attend. I'll be there. Jenny will be there. Go get your tickets now. touchedbytype1.org. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the Contour NextGen blood glucose meter. Learn more and get started today at contournext.com/juicebox. Did you know if just one person in your family has type 1 diabetes, you're up to 15 times more likely to get it too? So screen it like you mean it. One blood test can spot type 1 diabetes early. Tap now, talk to a doctor, or visit screenedfortype1.com for more info. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by screenedfortype1.com. Guys, I'm going to read you something. At the time of this recording, Deniz was working on iAPS, but shortly after he moved his focus to Trio, which is a new version of the iAPS app that's been started by a number of former iAPS contributors. Trio is currently in an open beta, but keep your ears peeled for a future episode about Trio once the app is officially released.
Hi, my name is Deniz. I usually go by Dan. I'm 31 years old. I'm from Germany. I've been diagnosed with diabetes type 1 in 1997, which should make it 27 years with type 1, I think, now.
Wow.
For the better part of my life, I've been on MDI, actually, 25 years. I've gotten very, very lately into tech and, the whole CGM pumping, AID apps and stuff. So, yeah.
Wow. You got diagnosed when you were how old? 4?
I was 5. Yeah, I was 5, close to turning 6. Yeah.
A year after I got married, which just made me feel very old. How long have I been married? I've been married 27 years. Whew.
Yeah. more than a quarter of a century, man.
That's a long time. Okay. Okay. So you're diagnosed at 5. You're 31 now. You did MDI for the first 25 years?
Yes. I've just gotten a pump last year, actually. I've got my first CGM in 2019.
Okay.
Which is quite funny because I'm actually super into tech. I was always into computers and gaming and stuff. I'm a software developer by career choice, and I actually got a degree in computer science and a postgrad in computer science. So it's kind of weird that I've not stepped into the whole tech stuff around diabetes earlier.
That's insane.
But for some reason, it was working, and my endo who's also type 1, by the way, was just you know what? Why change the car when it's running perfectly fine, Just drive. And so I've been on it for a long time.
I'm always interested when people say things like, it's going great, or it was working, or I love my doctor. Yeah. What does it was working mean? What were your outcomes like?
Not gonna lie, when I was a teenager, I had the whole rebellious phase. So there were some really high A1Cs in there, and like just above 10, 11, right? But I had a very, very bad DKA when I was, I think, 19. And that basically really, made me get my shit together.
Yeah.
And so after that, I've been in like the low 6s on MDI, even with just finger pricks, actually. I started to work out a lot. I started, watching what I eat, watching my diet, basically. And then I got a CGM in 2019, which was pretty late. And while on that CGM, I was even below 6s. Like I was just between like 5'8", 6'4", right? I was like ranging in between that on MDI and just the CGM. So I switched to basically a pump because of something we're probably going to get into later. But yeah, that's my outcomes on MDI, yeah.
So like those first 14 years, up until the DKA, basically, you were, what? Were you always bolusing, kind of bolusing, sometimes what did that look like? Like skipping meals once in a while, always taking your basal but not covering food, that kind of stuff?
So basically, I was diagnosed when I was 5 years old, and back then they used to do things in Germany very, very conservatively, right? So you got your long acting in the morning and at night, and then I had basically like set times and set carb amounts to eat and set boluses to go with that, because they weren't really doing the whole check your sugar, and depending on what it is, you need to correct your blood glucose and then bolus for the meal. So I was basically finger pricking in the morning, 7:30 before school, and then I was like finger pricking at lunch, and then I was maybe finger pricking in the afternoon and before dinner, and I was just like eating at like set times and giving set boluses, and I was giving like my set long acting insulin, which I think was Lent at the time. As time moved on, I wanted to get more independent, and then they kind of put me on like a new thing, which they called the intensive therapy plan, which was basically how you would do MDI in like a modern way, right? It's just like check your blood glucose, whatever it is, here's your ICR, here's your ISF, right? And then you just like correct and you go with the flow, but you still just use pen injections.
Yeah.
So being like a teenager and stupid and not really understanding what, long-term complications mean, you just sometimes you stop finger pricking and you just go, well, that's 2 cheeseburgers. I'm going to do like 5 units. And then maybe your sugar was like at 220 or like 180. Right. And you shouldn't really have done just like 5 units, right? Went along like that through my teenage years. My parents, they got divorced when I was really little, even before my diagnosis, actually. My mom was like having super big mental problems and like personal problems, and she wasn't really like on top of my diabetes while I was a child and a teenager. So I was kind of by myself in that regard. Like, she took me to the regular endo appointments and stuff. It's not like she was like sleeping below a bridge or whatever. She wasn't really like you are with Arden, for example, right? She wasn't like on top of my diabetes and like, slowly educating me to like take care of myself and, like letting me off the reins, so to speak, but still pretty much on top of it because I was a teenager, right? And so it just kind of went that way for a couple of years, right?
Yeah, you don't recognize. It's a long, long process to understand a big idea. And it's not like sitting down and talking about it for 2 hours. It's 5 seconds here and 5 minutes there, and saying something on the first of the month and remembering to say it again 3 weeks later, and biting right through your lip if they do something that you're like, oh, not that, but you don't want to cause like a pressure point. So you just cruise through it. You go, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. But then you have to make a mental note then as a parent later to come in and clean it up later. It's a lot of work. I understand why it doesn't happen. And if your mom was having other trouble on top of that, then, I mean, it makes sense, Yeah.
Yeah. And so like in retrospect, I can understand what happened when I was a child and when I was a teenager. Frankly, it's still between us, and we are like very estranged with me being an adult and her, now being retired. That kind of really still stands between us.
Yeah.
Right. Other things as well, but that's also like a huge portion of what kind of stands between us. Yeah, it's like...
Yeah, but then, sure. I mean, that listen, I'm standing in the middle looking at both sides. I see what could have happened to your mom. That doesn't mean that she didn't still need to do it. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard, but you still have to go do it. And I just think that a lot of times people think that making a baby is like buying a houseplant. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, I love the way this looks. I'll put it in the corner, and every once in a while, I'll dump some water in it. It'll probably be okay. Very much not like that. Very much. Yeah. You making children is not for the faint of heart. And if you think it's easy, you're probably doing it wrong. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you and your mom to this day, not a great relationship, and you think it's mainly because of your diabetes?
Not because of the diabetes, but basically because of like how she reacted to diabetes. But it's not about like the main thing, right? Like my mom has personal problems and she still has them to this day. I think she's borderline narcissistic, right? And it just builds issues in like personal relationships. Not trying to like know my mom, for God's sake, right? But it's like it's just a very difficult relationship with her, right? Sure. We talk from time and again, right? But honestly, she lives like 10 minutes from the place I work at, right? And I don't really think I have seen her in like the past 6 months. And it would just basically be like, guys, hey, I'm going for lunch break, and I could just like walk over and have a coffee with her, basically.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't do that kind of thing.
Does that bother? I know this is not why you're on, but does that bother you? Do you think about it?
To an extent, because I also don't really have a relationship with my father, right? Because they split, and he went back to, like, he's from Turkey, right? So I'm half German, half Turkish, and he went back to Turkey, and I don't even know if he's still alive. So there's the father figure gone, and then there's also the hard relationship with the mother, right? So it's not I'm an orphan, right? She's still there, and I had a really, really, really important relationship with my grandma, so my mother's mom. But yes, sure, it bothers me, right? Because, for example, I see how extremely close my girlfriend of 9 years is with her family and her mom especially, right? And also her father. So yeah, sure that bothers you, right? Because you kind of want to like rely on family. But I got a tattoo on my right arm which says "True friends are family." I got that, a long story, but I got that when another friend of mine was going through a really hard time, and we were all drunk. And then we all like made that vow to get that tattoo. And so there's like 4 people running around with the tattoo now, which says "True friends are family." And I really mean that though, right? It's like a funny story when we were like young and stupid and drunk, right? But it's like, we didn't get a tattoo when we were drunk, by the way. So, don't drink and drive, and don't drink and get tattooed. We got it after the fact. And I still kind of live by that, right? I kind of really consider a group of really close friends I have, my family. Right. And I have done that for probably the past 10, 12, 15 years, I guess.
It makes solid sense to me.
Right. Yeah. And so I've kind of, chosen the family I want to have, as many people do. And the family you can't really choose, which is usually your parents or siblings. And I don't have siblings. I'm an only child. They are there, and there's past that happened. There's history.
Yeah.
And I kind of just, have to live with it. As I said before, right, I understand what happened, and I kind of understand where she is now, being where I am in my life, coming from like a working class family, having myself worked up to like a postgrad degree, working as a software engineer, right? Life is hard, right? Life isn't always, a pony farm. But still it's.
I've never heard life's not a pony farm before, so you're very close to calling your episode Pony Farm, but go ahead.
It's like a German idiom that I just kind of translated. Because like in German you would say, das Leben ist kein Ponyhof. So,
well, I definitely can't make that the title.
Yeah.
Although, if you send it out to me phonetically, I could make it the title. You think anyone would download it if the title was like that?
Oh, we can totally try that and see how your download numbers are.
Oh, I see. No. You don't care about my downloads. You're like, just let the whole thing collapse, Scott. We'll try it. No, it's hilarious. I actually am going to get you to send it to me. So,
okay.
I think I'm just going to kind of fast forward up to last year. Because I think it's fascinating to just do MDI for 25 years, being a software developer, and then one day go, hey, you know what? Why don't I try this other thing? So my first question is were you not exposed to it? Like, did you not know it existed, or were you just happy with how things are going? From the very beginning, your kids mean everything to you. That means you'd do anything for them, especially if they're at risk. So when it comes to type 1 diabetes, screen it like you mean it. Because even if just one person in the family has it, your child is up to 15 times more likely to get it too. Screen it like you mean it, because type 1 diabetes can develop at any age. And once you get results, you can get prepared for your child's future. So screen it like you mean it. Type 1 starts long before there are symptoms, but one blood test could help you to spot it early, before they need insulin, and could lower the risk of serious complications like diabetic ketoacidosis or DKA. Talk to your doctor about how to screen for type 1 diabetes, because the more you know, the more you can do. So don't wait. Tap now or visit screenfortype1.com to learn more. Again, that's screenfortype1.com. Screen it like you mean it.
Well, so I knew it existed, but honestly, I didn't really like look into it that much because I was kind of happy with what I had. And so I kind of started looking into like more tech stuff before I went to like a semester to study, like a semester abroad to study in Canada. I studied 1 semester in Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I kind of want to have like my hands free to do stuff abroad. And then so that's when I got the CGM, basically. Because my endo, he was like, oh, now you want a CGM? Really? Yeah, sure, let's go for it. So we did that. I'm in Germany, we have like the whole universal healthcare thing. It's easy for me to get a CGM. So I got a CGM after like some paperwork. Honestly, what made me go from MDI after so long to pump therapy was basically suddenly out of nowhere having a macular edema in my eye, right? So I went into the regular checkup with the eye doctor guy. And they do the whole thing where you like drip you in the eye, and the whole thing gets bigger, and then they look into like the retina. And I don't have retinopathy, and I don't have anything else in the eye basically. But suddenly there was this macular edema, and so the guy goes, "Yeah, how's your diabetes?" And I go like, "Yeah, my A1C is like 5.9, and the one before was like 6.0, and the one before like was also." And he goes like, "Oh, you got to be kidding me!" And I'm like, "No, seriously, like." The past 8 to 10 years, I've been in like the low 6s, and I got my shit together. And so he was like, "Okay, yeah, this is super super bad, and we kind of need to fix this." And so they started me on like eye injections for 8 months, I think. Mm-hmm. It's gone now, right? So spoiler alert, it's gone now. Everything's fine. But when I went back to my endo and was like, "Okay, so I got an issue. I have something in my eye. What the do we do now?"
Yeah.
He was basically like, "Okay, your diabetes is basically so like fine-tuned. We kind of need to find out like what the issue here is." It was like, this could be long-term complication from basically having somewhere between like, 8 to 10 years of bullshit during your childhood and my teenage years. But he was like, still, it is really early to have that kind of complication at the time I was 30. No, actually, I just had turned 31. To have that at 31 with like the sugars you've been having for the past 10 years.
Yeah.
He called it metabolism fluctuations. So, talking to you, it's basically the whole postprandial spike. So going high after a meal, or going high at like a random point in the day, and then coming back down, being in range. But just the whole, you go up, you go down, you go up, you go down. And he was like, yeah, maybe that is like some issue, because that can also, change things in your eye if you have a lot of that, basically. And so he was like, your A1C is really low and really well tuned. And the only thing that I personally can think of is basically, let's put you on a pump and let's try to basically replicate the human body functionality as closely as possible. Stop the variability
with the spikes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because if you're on pen injections, and especially if you're on long long-lasting insulin and short-lasting like rapid insulin, it's always you do the injection and it's always a push. Mm-hmm. And a push of insulin and a push, and then it levels out, and then it becomes effective, right? And then you always have this like certain peak. And as you know, if you're on a pump, you only use rapid acting or ultra rapid acting insulin. You don't really have like those high peaks, right? And he was basically trying to get the insulin dosage in my bloodstream as evenly as possible, and also get blood sugar as evenly as possible.
Right. Yeah. I think back. I just had an experience where I was talking with somebody the other day about some of the things that they learned on the podcast through the Pro Tip series. And it took me back to managing Arden like that before, Arden's using iAPS now. She used Loop before that. She's used Omnipod 5. Like, we've used a lot of different algorithms. And before that, an algorithm wasn't a thing when Arden was 8 years old. You know what I mean? Like, so it was just me like looking and thinking, like, we have to match the effort here, right? Like, blood sugar is making an effort to drive up. I need to be making an effort to push back, but not too hard. And, once you have a CGM, it's really when it opened up for me, right? Arden puts a CGM on, you can see it in real time. And you're like, oh, I need to add, I don't know, the way I thought about it was like, I need to add resistance here, and not insulin resistance, but resistance with insulin. Like, the blood sugar is trying to go up. I'll put some resistance here so it can't go up. I'll take the resistance away so it doesn't create a low later. If she tries to get low, we're going to add some resistance with carbs, but not enough to push her back up again. And now I look back in hindsight and I go, oh, I was an algorithm. That's what I was doing.
Yeah, I was just about to say you were the algorithm, basically.
And it was
right?
exhausting. I don't want you to be, like, no one should be confused. I was exhausted and dying, I think.
Yeah, totally.
And up in the middle of the night and etc. But Arden's A1Cs were in the high fives, mid to high fives, and she was growing up and didn't have any trouble with her diabetes. And I kept thinking, I mean, hopefully something will come along, right? You know what I mean? Like, and then all of a sudden one day, like there it was.
Yep.
So having that experience of living like that, having figured it out on my own, finding out a way to apply it, and then seeing a machine come in and go, oh, I could do that for you. And then having watched them now improve over time,
yep.
I keep thinking like, wow, this is insane. Like maybe, like fingers crossed, like maybe Arden doesn't go into an eye doctor ever and hear, hey, what's that in your eye? You know what I mean? Because that's really that's what I'm doing it for, right? Like you're doing it for short-term happiness and health and long-term happiness and health. The whole thing is happiness and health, honestly. I'm glad that they were able to fix it for you. How many injections did you get before it was clear?
I got, I think 8 injections. Ooh. Yeah. January to August, every 4 weeks.
They say it doesn't hurt. Is that true?
It really doesn't hurt. The funny thing is,
but it freaks you the out, right? Like when they're coming at you with it.
So technically they put like this thing in your eye, which basically like pries open your eyelids, and then you are like told to and now look at like a certain direction. I think for me it was like lower right corner, basically. So you were just like looking down, and then they do the injection like all the way up there, right? The eye is numbed a bit, right? They put like a numbing drippy thing in there. They sanitize the shit out of your eye as well. Like they put all this stuff on your face, and you're like not like you're basically sitting there like this. You're like not supposed to touch your head at all, or like breathe or move or whatever. And then they do the injection, and you don't feel it. You don't see the needle. The only thing that I felt was basically it's a bit like as if someone like just like precious like puts some pressure on you. Like if I don't tell you I'm touching your face, and then suddenly a finger touches your face, like very very lightly.
That's what it felt like.
That's the feeling in your eye. Like you feel like a little pressure thing.
Amazing.
And then what you see is basically it's a bit like as if suddenly before your eye there's like fluid or like a fog.
Okay.
For like a minute, because that's like basically when he pushes in the injection solution, right? And it kind of mixes in there and does whatever. But no, you don't really feel it.
Magical.
Funny that you're saying it doesn't hurt. So he does the injection. I think it was the third or the fourth one. And then he does the injection, and I feel like him pulling away after the injection, and he goes, "Oh," and I'm like, "Doc, what the fuck is oh? Like, please don't just owe me here,
don't say
right?"
Oh.
and he goes like, "Yeah, so I think a little blood vessel just burst. That's totally fine. That's all right. Nothing's going to happen to you." And I'm like, "What do you mean blood vessel burst?" "Yeah, there's just like some minor bleeding. Don't worry about it." And then they took some tissues and put it away, and then took like some more sanitizing lotion on it, right, to like stop the bleeding and stuff. And then they were like, "Okay, you be on your way. Your eye might be just a little bit red, Don't worry about it. In like a week or so, it's gonna be like it's gone."
Okay.
And so I was like, "Okay, fine." And so they basically put a Band-Aid on your eye after that, and you're supposed to leave it on for like 6 to 8 hours. And so I had this Band-Aid on my eye, and then in the evening, because the appointment was like 10 a.m. or something. So in the evening, I take the Band-Aid off my eye, and I look in the like I'm in the bathroom. I took the Band-Aid off my eye, and I look into the mirror, and I kid you not, I look like T1. Like what's the Terminator name? T1000. Okay. Like my eye was completely red. Like completely. There was no white left in my eye. It was completely red. And so I'm like, what the actual F is happening here?
Yeah.
And so it was like 8 or 9 p.m. at that time. So the clinic was closed. And next morning I called him, and I'm like, yeah, so the dude said there was a little blood vessel that burst. And I thought like, of like a weightlifter who has like a little burst blood vessel in the eye, right? And you just see like this little red thing in their eye. And they're like, yeah, you know what? If it's really that bad, just come in tomorrow. And so I go in, and I'm standing there in like the welcome area, and people are going by me, and they're looking at me like I'm a zombie, right? Because like the whole eye was like, yeah. So anyways, he was like, he looked at it the next day, and he was like, yeah, it does look bad now, but it'll be gone in like a week. And so I ended up looking like that for 5 weeks.
5 weeks?
And yeah, because there was like so much blood in there.
Right.
and
could you see out of it okay at that time?
Yeah. No issues with seeing like little, but it was just like,
wasn't like a horror movie. Everything wasn't red or tainted or
no. Luckily not. Yeah, and so it took like 5 weeks, and it went from like blood red to like basically brown to like lightly yellow, while it was like basically decomposing the blood in the eye or whatever. Like it was like decaying blood.
Took you a month to explain to the entire neighborhood, I don't have some weird eye COVID or anything like that. Please don't be scared of me.
It was kind of bad because, at work, like my close team, like the 4 or 5 guys at work, they kind of know something. Like everyone who asks, I'm going to tell I'm a diabetic, right? And my close team, they know it. They know the pumps from beeping and the CGM from beeping, right?
Yeah.
But if you just like suddenly walk into work with like an eye that looks like that, everyone's going like, what the fuck is up with that guy?
Stay away. Stay away.
Stay away, please. And so one sec. So let me see if I can. 1 sec.
Are you gonna show me a picture?
Yeah, I'm gonna show you a picture. 1 sec. How do I?
The Contour NextGen blood glucose meter is sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast, and it's entirely possible that it is less expensive in cash than you're paying right now for your meter through your insurance company. That's right. If you go to my link, contournext.com/juicebox, you're going to find links to Walmart, Amazon, Walgreens, CVS, Rite Aid, Kroger, and Meijer. You could be paying more right now through your insurance for your test strips and meter than you would pay through my link for the Contour NextGen and Contour Next test strips in cash. What am I saying? My link may be cheaper out of your pocket than you're paying right now, even with your insurance. And I don't know what meter you have right now. I can't say that. But what I can say for sure is that the Contour NextGen meter is accurate. It is reliable, and it is the meter that we've been using for years. contournext.com/juicebox. And if you already have a Contour meter and you're buying test strips, doing so through the Juicebox Podcast link will help to support the show. Den and I are looking at each other today, which we don't do very often, but he's got like a rock solid internet connection. And I have to admit, I can't look at myself because I'm so stunned at how like lean I. Oh my God, that's your eye.
That was just like after I took the Band-Aid off. That was this.
It's horrible. Part of me wants you to send that to me so I can make that the cover image for your episode.
please don't. And so. Oh no, I'm sorry. This was right after the injection.
Oh, okay.
And then when I showed you this was like the next morning.
Oh my God.
And I walked around this for like a solid month. Like this.
No, you look like a robot. Like
exactly. I look like what's the name? T1000, T4000.
Yeah, the Terminator.
T1000. Yeah, the Terminator. Yeah, I looked like the Terminator. It was like just the red eye. It was so funny.
That's really stunning. Wow. Did it hurt during that time, or it just looked weird?
No, it just looked really weird, and it felt a bit like as if you bumped your arm or your like leg on something, right? It like just like a mild hematoma basically, but it wasn't really painful, right? I could see without any issues, right?
Right.
And I just looked like a zombie for a month.
So this experience makes you say, I want to know about all the stuff now. So like, what pump do you go to?
So second thing, coming back to the, hey, why didn't you get into like pumping or whatever and did MDI for so long? I always wanted to avoid tubes. I always wanted to avoid tubing, period.
Yeah,
I never wanted tubes. So I'm using Omnipod now, right? It's the clear choice. And the thing here in Germany is we do have great healthcare, and we do have, it's not a huge issue to get on pumps, but they are a bit picky when it, gets to, I want that specific pump. Because,
Oh, they just want to reach in the closet and give you the one they have?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
And so my ender was like, yeah, that's going to be a bit of a fighting, right? And so he basically put in like a bunch of paperwork, like to the insurance company here. And we really actually had to fight. And then I got the Omnipod DASH I am on now. I got it on trial. I had like they shipped me a 3-month worth of supply here, and then after 3 months, like, I had to hand in a ton of paperwork. Glucose diaries from like the past 6 months, A1Cs, and the whole blood panels from like the past year or so.
You couldn't just show them that picture of your eye?
No. Oh, I was already on a pump when that happened.
Oh, okay. So, yeah. Oh, I mean, I would have been like, hey, this is why I need it, please.
Exactly. So, anyways, we were really fighting, and so I got it on trial. And after 3 months, everything was even better than it was before. So I went from like the A1C before I went on Omnipod was 6.2, and the A1C right after was 4.5. So it dropped by 0.8 within a span of 3 months.
Do you eat it in a low carb style or something like that?
No, I basically did the whole pump training with the lady from Insulin at the clinic. And the second pod at home was on loop because I was like, I'm a software dev. I'm going to do this right.
So you went from 25 years of MDI almost directly into, I'm going to download an algorithm off the internet and use it.
Sure.
What a leap.
Why not?
I love the why not. I'm trying to figure out why not sooner.
That's true. Why not sooner? And I've actually...
I mean to say, I think there's a bit of a lag because you're in a different country. I'm sorry. I'm talking over you once in a while.
No worries.
I don't mean like, hey, why didn't you figure it out? I mean like, why did it... Like, it just seems like such a natural step to me. Like, you're a software developer. You're in your 30s. Like, if I said to you, hey, you want a Tesla, right? You'd be like, of course I do. Like, that fits in, like, the narrative what you're interested in. Like, it just feels like this should as well, but it really took, like, a health scare to get you there.
It took a health scare to get there, and I don't want to put any blame on my endo because he's a really super great guy. He's a type 1 himself, so great bedside manner, because if you're like talking to him about a specific issue you're having at like a specific activity or whatever, he gets it because it's like 99.9% he already had that situation, right? But he's an older guy, and he is like on this super old pump, and he's basically, I guess, team don't change a running system, right? It's working for him. He's having, like, from objectively looking at it, he's having all the results in like the agreed upon metrics, or like in the agreed upon ranges, basically, right? He has his A1C in the ranges it should be in. He's not having a lot of hypos or whatever. He's doing okay. And in retrospect, I wasn't doing okay, right?
Yeah.
I 100% was over, like my basal was too high, 100%, and I was basically feeding insulin, but I didn't really know it.
Right.
Even though I had a CGM, and I was having more lows. Like my lows were below 5%, but now I'm having like looking at the Dexcom, basically, I don't even have 1% of lows now.
Did you lose weight since you went on a pump?
Not that much.
Not that
but
much.
I'm weightlifting like 6 days a week, and I'm eating a lot, and I'm eating like 300, 400 grams of carbs a day. I'm not low carb,
right?
In any kind of way and form or shape. Yeah, no.
Do you think if I name the episode "Sex Days a Week," anybody will even hear it through your accent? Because that was fantastic. You're like, I'm weightlifting 6 days a week.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, because the German word for six is sechs.
Oh, okay. I heard you get caught in between two languages. But basically, you've got a great endo, but he's older. His mark for what is good is different than what is good now. And he's a if it ain't broke, don't fix it person. In a world where things are moving so quickly, you always have to not have an eye on what's happening. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I don't know if you've ever, I don't know, then if you listen to the podcast or
I do.
If you don't, or how. Oh, well,
I do. I don't. So the thing is, you release so freaking many episodes.
You're welcome.
I usually can't really get through like all of them by the time you release new ones, but I usually listen to like on the way to work and like my commuting.
Yeah,
and I'm also quite active in your group. Like actually, you
and I
asked me to apply for a job.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I refer to one person because that person helps me to Mike, because Mike helps me with Arden's like algorithm, like the setup and stuff. And so if somebody has a question, I tag him, and you're like, hey, I could answer that, and I'm like, I don't know you. So, I actually commented that because I already had like answered the question of the poster. Yeah.
And I had like, I don't know, like 20 likes on it. And I was like, hey, so what exactly can Mike do that I didn't just answer here? And I wasn't being serious, right? It was.
No, I know you were kidding with me, but let me give you a little inside look. Okay.
Yeah.
There's like 46,000 people in there, 125 new posts a day. I saw the gist of it. I ran my eyes through it, and I was like, I want to make sure somebody who really understands this saw it, but I couldn't read all those comments. So I was just like,
totally.
Like tagging something. But no, it was a lot of fun. But
my endo, he's like, don't fix it if it ain't broke kind of guy. Yeah.
So I don't know how much of the podcast you've heard, but I put out a lot of content. There's no doubt. And you can't listen to all of it, and you can't have listened for the entire 10 years to know my psyche and everything. But there are a few things that drive me making the podcast, right? Overwhelmingly, it's my daughter's health. Like, I think if I can stay abreast of things, then she has the best chance at being okay. And then everybody else listening gets the benefit of that, right?
100%.
It's the community that it's created, because, again, I've mentioned this before, I did not expect this part of it. I didn't understand that, 46,000 people in a Facebook group that gets 125 posts a day, like 9,000 likes, comments, hearts, I think there's something like 28,000 of the 45,000 people are active every day in some way, shape, or form. It's insane.
That's like a small football stadium every day.
It's insane, basically. Right? And it all flows, whether you think it or not, it all flows through me. It follows my vibe. It does what I want it to do. Like I'm directing it very kind of in the background. And so that all is very important to me too. And part of what drives me, because I see how the community supports people, and I see how people whose names I've never seen before, whose faces I don't recognize, can come and tell me in a Facebook post, you don't know that I've been listening to this podcast for 9 months, but I have, and my kid's A1C is 5.4.
Yeah.
Like I helped that person without ever meeting them or knowing that I was talking to them. That's amazing, right? But the third kind of prong of what motivates me forward is a thing that I don't honestly talk about very much, which is my best friend who's dead. You know, so my friend Mike was No, you're very kind. But my friend Mike was diagnosed when we were just getting done high school, and we didn't talk about his type 1 diabetes, so much so that when my daughter was diagnosed, it didn't occur to me that I knew someone with type 1 for like a week.
Oh wow!
Because that is just not how it worked. He was regular in MPH. He shot. If he got dizzy, we fed him. Nobody wanted Mike to drive. You know what I mean? Like that was pretty much the extent of it. Yeah. I knew him to be a completely lovely person, thoughtful and lovely and intelligent. But if you just met him a couple of times, you might think he was a little
and he was probably like in the 400s,
unstable, like angry, like you thought he had a short temper. None of this. He's a beautiful person. But I think about his blood sugar and how high it was all of the time.
Yeah.
And
oh boy,
Mike stands up in his living room and dies in his 40s, you know, just has a heart attack, and just, you know, it didn't take him that moment, but it did in a couple of days. He was already on dialysis for years.
Oh, wow.
When I look back on his life, he was unlucky enough to be diagnosed at a certain time.
Yeah.
And then he was unlucky enough to be with a doctor who didn't push him to modernize his care.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not for just running forward and changing every time something new comes up. Like I'm not a new car guy every 6 months kind of like idea, even if I could afford it.
Yep.
But you can't find yourself in a situation where 15 years into your diabetes, you look up and go, what are people doing? I'm doing Lantus and MDI.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, because the advancements now are happening so quickly. That things are going to get better and better and better. And these are only opportunities to improve your health and to stop you from standing up in your living room and falling face forward in front of your wife.
Yeah.
You know, like, so I just, these are the things that like personally drive me behind the scenes to turn out. I mean, if you saw my calendar, you'd pass out.
Yeah.
Like you know what I mean? Because I don't care if you, please, everyone listening, listen to every episode, please. But if you can't, I understand. So I put 5 out a week. You pick the ones you want. You know what I mean? And
that's what I do basically.
Yeah. But that's why, because I'm trying to constantly reach people. I mean, if I'm being honest, then I have some guilt about Mike, because of all the people that I've reached and helped, he would never listen to me. It's kind of ironic, right? Like, I'm like, you know, the guy that runs the thing, like, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to hear it. And I do think sometimes that I just didn't try the right way or hard enough or frequently enough. And I am baffled sometimes that I'm able to help a person I've never met before remotely, but I couldn't help Mike to understand his diabetes better. I'm driven by the idea that I, in very plain English, do not want to die before my daughter.
Yeah.
And I do not want to see her have health issues as an old man.
Yep.
Like, I don't know that in my 70s, I could look at my grown child have a real health issue and not want to throw myself off a building.
Yeah.
So I'm doing a lot of things to protect my own psyche, if I'm being honest. You know.
So just for the record, Mike really got his together. I think you're talking about a person like Mike, right? You kind of know, but that don't listen to the podcast. Did I get that right?
No. My friend Mike is a kid.
Oh, the friend Mike. I'm so sorry.
No, I'm not mentioning another man named Mike.
We were talking about the other Mike. Yeah.
I'm sticking with my friend Mike as I grew up.
Yeah, like, I'm sorry. Okay.
He just didn't. He never. I don't even think he ever wondered.
Yeah.
And then he didn't have the luck I can't believe I'm saying this is luck, but he didn't have the luck you had. Like, the first medical thing that popped up for Mike was his kidneys, not like, we can give you some injections in your eye.
Yeah.
You know. Anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
that was
wow.
a bummer, Dan.
Yeah.
Sorry. But tell people.
No, I'm very sorry. But it's basically, you're raising such a great point. Because like my girlfriend was just the other day, we were like sitting down for dinner and she goes like, hey, you know what? How come you didn't like do this all sooner? And then I was like, we've been together for almost 9 years now. And, you've met me, you've been part of my like diabetes journey and you know my life, right? What would you say? Like, was I living a bad life? Was I having issues with it? And she's like, you know what? No, you weren't, right? And so I was like, yeah, that's the point exactly. And it's so funny. Not wanting to change topics here, but actually, the great Katie DeSimone, right, the creator of Loop Dogs, I was actually following her on Instagram because she started like a weight loss journey and started doing like CrossFit.
I remember.
And I kind of knew her from Loop because I had read of Loop, and then I started like following her on Instagram, and we actually were like exchanging messages on a regular basis around her like exercise stuff. And because I'm a gym person, she was a gym person. It was COVID, right? We were working out from home and in like a garage and stuff, and it was so funny. And it's like this thing, like these fun or like weird stories life writes sometimes. On the day Katie passed away, right? Rest her in peace. I got my first pump.
Oh, no kidding.
So I'm getting goosebumps right now talking about it.
Yeah.
But it's like I've known these kind of things, but for some reason, when you're like not really pushed into that kind of direction, because I was having like high 5s A1Cs and I wasn't constantly going low or like staying super high all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And so for some odd reason, and I can't really tell you why, I honestly cannot tell you why, I never got into it. And now looking back, it's like I'm just doing so much less around diabetes.
Yeah.
Like, right? It's like I have a CGM now, I have a pump now, I have an app that takes care of my insulin basically. I look at my phone, right? I've only looked at my phone since we've been talking because I'm getting messages all the time.
Right.
I'm not even concerned about my diabetes, right? Yeah. It's just I'm doing a bolus here and there, and the rest is taken care of, right?
I've been unaware of Arden's blood sugar for hours now. I don't know what it is or what it's doing.
Yeah.
I haven't thought about it. The only reason I even thought about it this morning is because we just upped her Ozempic dose from 0.25 to 0.5. And then like a day and a half after we upped it, she started having these weird lows. And I was like, oh God, I think it's the Ozempic, and we're making changes to settings and stuff like that. I'm also a little panicky because I have all the auto tuning turned on iAPS. I think we realized that the Ozempic needed to be turned up for a couple of weeks, but didn't like do it yet.
Yeah.
And so the algorithm was pushing harder. Yep. And then suddenly we thought, oh, now it's helping and the algorithm's still pushing. So I'm trying to make adjustments and stuff. It turns out, by the way, that's not where her lows were coming from. Her pod nicked a blood vessel. It's the second time it's happened. It's the second time it's happened since she's had diabetes. But we were basically, she was mainlining insulin. Like, you
basically,
know.
It's like there like this.
Happening so quickly. So like last night, I was like, Arden, look, I'm like, we keep making these changes and nothing's happening. You know, like we're chopping at your ISF, we're chopping at your carb ratio. I'm like, you know, something's wrong. And and then 2:00 in the morning, she sent me a picture of like this blood on her leg.
Oh yeah, and because she pulled the pod and it's just like a fountain.
Yeah, and she goes, "Oh, I know what happened." And I was like, "Okay." So she put a new pod on, and we got her set. And I just sent her a text like 6 hours ago, and I was like, "Hey, put the ISF back to this." And that's it. I haven't thought about it again since then. You know? No.
Yeah, it's the funny things. Yeah,
but I mean, all that turmoil and unknown ideas and things you couldn't imagine, and still in a 24-hour period, I had the whole thing worked out, and we're good again. And now we won't look at it again. She'll just go live her life, you know?
Yep.
So now I take your point. So when you get on this algorithm and you're managing an A1C in the 4s, Jesus, that's crazy. Why are you able to do that? I know you're exercising and you're probably eating well.
In the 5s, sorry.
In the 5s, excuse me.
Low 5s, yeah.
So if you're exercising and eating well and you're using an algorithm and you understand how the algorithm works, I get how you end up there. Like it's pretty simple, but can you lay it out for people? Like, why does it work for you?
Well, so I always, when I'm getting asked in like the Facebook groups that I'm part of, right, I always say I'm just proactive around my diabetes, basically. Mm-hmm. I work out 6 days a week, so there's like a certain exercise level already in there, right? I try, you had the glucose goddess on your podcast, and I really enjoyed that episode, actually. But she talks about like clothing the carbs. And I've like intuitively been eating like that for years now, right? It's always basically a handful of carbs, a handful of protein, a handful of veg. I eat like that, right? Yeah. It's been like that for like the past, I don't know how many years. If I have my CGM alerts quite low, right? I have during the day I have it at 155. I'm on milligram deciliter, so I have it on 155. So I'm kind of proactive around that, right? If I'm working seated for most of the day, I'm a software engineer, so after lunch I try to take a walk. First of all, to like get my blood going because I've been sitting for the past 5 hours.
So you don't fall asleep too, yeah.
Right? But it's just I have lunch with my colleagues. I really enjoy having that, and then I just go for like a 10-minute walk, get a coffee, have my coffee in my hand, and just walk around, take a walk around the block, that kind of stuff, right? If you basically understand how like the human body's metabolism works and how insulin affects it and how like glucose affects it, yeah, it's like this is going to sound like pretentious and elitist, but it's not rocket science. Once it clicks, once you've understood like how the heck it works, it's not really that hard.
I'm going to say something that's going to sound crazy for a second. I mentioned this to you before we started, but you can see it behind me because the camera's on.
Yeah.
So my kids at Christmas time, I don't know if I have to tell this story. Like I can tell it in 2 seconds, but we basically were standing around a few days before Christmas.
Yeah.
And I said to everybody, I was like, name something you wish you'd done that you haven't done. I was just like a thought exercise to have a conversation. And it got around to me, and I think I blew everybody away by saying, I've always wanted to raise a chameleon. And everybody was like, we're like, you've never mentioned that once. And I was like, no, it's not a thing I talk about. It's very difficult to do. It's a lot of effort. It's not a thing I would actually do because of all the effort, but it's a thing I think about once in a while. I wish I would have tried that. Anyway, now there's a chameleon here with me, and I've had to learn about like it very quickly because it's a delicate animal, and I don't have months to figure it out. I had like days to figure it out, and oddly enough, I figured out how to keep this chameleon healthy the same way people use my podcast to learn about their diabetes. And these intersecting ideas have just been falling on me for weeks now. Like, found a man named Bill out in the world who just has a ton of knowledge, and he's good at communicating it.
Yeah.
And I absorbed what he said, and in no time put this thing in a really healthy situation. Neither here nor there. I'm watching how it eats, and it eats to ensure its bowel movement. It's very interesting. Like it's got like these 4 or 5 bugs that it really likes. Some of them have more fat in them. Some of them have more, calcium in them, etc.
Yep.
And that thing will like yesterday, just boom, boom, boom. It'll eat 4 crickets like it's nothing.
Yep.
And then the next day you show it a cricket and it's like, no.
Yeah.
And then you wait and you come back to a very well hydrated bug that's high in fat, and it goes, yes, that one.
Mm-hmm.
And it hits that cricket. And then it's just fascinating. It's all about its digestion, like its whole life.
Yep.
But it knows how to turn its nose up at something when it has an option. And as people, we don't know what we're talking about. You know what I mean? Like we don't understand food. Nope. Most people don't understand food.
Yep.
And so, I mean, anyway, that's exactly what you're talking about. Like just putting in the right things, giving yourself the right exercise.
Yep.
In this chameleon's case, it's about humidity. In your case, it's going for a walk and exercising.
Yeah.
You know, and then your body works well. That's it. It's interesting.
Yep.
It really is.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So and also with like the whole eye thing, I basically talked to my endo and I was like, yeah, so what do we have to do, right? And I was talking about like how he said we have to like try to keep the fluctuations low and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been in like the high 80s range on MDI, and since I've jumped ship and I'm on an AID now, and I got the pump now, I'm on a certain app now. You know, it's basically I have to fuck up things to not be 100% time range.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. But for me, and this is actually where this whole thing is an issue on like the mental side of things. If I am 100% time in range, but if I'm 160 for the past 6 hours, I get icky.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not like it's not because I know I'm going to die, but it's like I'm just above like a certain level I don't really want to be at, right? And so I'm kind of getting like slightly irritated. I'm like, okay, guys, I'm gonna go for a walk now, right? Or hey, guys, I'm gonna go on a treadmill now. So it's like I really try to be in like what they call tight time in range, so between like 70 and 140, ideally even below that, right? And I really try to be there, and because I also came to find out, if I'm basically above 160, I start to feel a certain cognitive decline.
Yeah.
I really feel that at work, for example.
Right,
so
right.
I try to be below that because it just affects me in my day-to-day life.
Yeah. No, I noticed it first when Arden was younger and she played softball that over a certain number, her foot speed literally diminished.
Yeah.
She was slower all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And you're saying because you're doing a thoughtful job, you can feel your cognition. And I would imagine too, a third prong of this wheel is you're also thinking, ooh, complications. Like you now have that in your head where you didn't have that before.
Yeah, true.
Right. So it's how I actually feel. It's how I actually think. And it's an eye on the future, which is the thing, by the way, you brought up earlier when you asked your girlfriend, like, did I really look like I wasn't doing well? The one thing you didn't have during that time was an eye on the future. I didn't mean to say eye on. That seemed like a weird pun, but I didn't mean it that way.
Yeah, no worries. No pun intended.
A red eye on the future. Yeah. Should I call it red eye on the future? Ooh, wait a minute. Now we're getting there. Red eye on the future. It's a little long, but I don't hate it. That to me is what you were lacking. It's what everyone's lacking.
Yep.
I know that sounds overly simplistic, but we're all lacking giving enough consideration to the thing we can't see or imagine yet.
Yes.
You know, that's pretty much what you're doing here. So
yeah, exactly.
There was part of me that when I knew you were coming on, like I really did want to talk about iAPS a little bit and how it works, but I don't know how comfortable you are with that because of things that are.
Well, I mean, if you got questions, let go, right? I can totally answer questions. I've been on it for the better portion of 8-9 months now.
Okay.
Because so I got on Loop, and I didn't just get on Loop. I also jumped into the whole DIY community, and I basically jumped like both feet and head ahead through the wall, basically. So like 2 months later, I was answering questions, and like 3 months later, I started contributing to the projects, right? Because I was like, this is I want to pay it forward, and so. By now, I'm a moderator in the Loop and Learn group, if I may plug them here, right? I was a moderator in the iAPS group, but I still help around that application. I contributed in a major way to what people may or may not know as the browser build method, right? I improved the build method there and improved automations in that regard. And yeah, I'm just part of like a bigger community now that I kind of want to see thrive.
Yeah.
Right? And so ask away by any means.
So I'm in the position where the other Mike that you thought I was confusing earlier, Mike who's been on the podcast and who helped me build Arden's app.
Yes.
He gave me the lead-in settings. He's just basically went through every menu and was like, this, that, make that one this like that. So I don't know why I started where I started. And the truth is that once it was set up, it didn't need a lot of dial turning to get it there. I just had to get her basal right, her insulin sensitivity, and her carb ratio. Once I got all that right, it ran pretty well. And then one day I was like, this thing says it has like dynamic settings and like auto tuning and stuff like that. And I was just like, blink, I'll turn that on and see what happens.
Yeah.
This is the first system that I'm using with Arden, that Arden's using, that I don't think I can thoughtfully talk about its execution. I just know it's working, and I know if I keep her settings commensurate with her needs, that the rest of it kind of works.
Yeah.
Do you know all those settings? Because it feels like there's 50 settings. Like, could you go to every one of them and say, "Oh, this one's 3.8, but I know why it needs to be 3.7"? Like, you know what I'm asking?
Well, even though there's like a bunch of settings in there, which is also what makes it like very much more complicated to like get into compared to Loop, basically, right? There are like a handful of settings, I want to say, maybe like a dozen at max, right? That you kind of have to look at. And then if you got those settings and your like normal profile stuff, so like basal, carb ratio, ISF, fine-tuned. And then also depending on what kind of dynamic algorithm you choose, there's logarithmic and sigmoid in it. It uses your profile settings in a different way, basically. You are kind of, off to a really good start and off to like, no, not a good start. You're really...
Yeah, it's going to work well. Yeah.
So I have said it. If you're talking about autotune and if autotune is on for Arden while using dynamic, please turn it off.
Okay. So autotune and dynamic can't be on at the same time.
It shouldn't be on. No.
So what's autotune?
Autotune is basically does every 24 hours. It kind of looks at what happened, so to speak, and it adjusts your basal. And if you choose to let it do it, also your ISF and your carb ratios.
Okay.
And it basically overrides what is in your settings for that. And but mainly basal here is the problem, because depending on what dynamic algorithm you're on, I think you're on logarithmic, I guess. I don't know if you've
Oh,
toggle
by the way, I
sigmoid
heard you
switch.
say that, and I thought, I have no idea which one that is.
Okay,
So,
I think you're on the default one, and the default one doesn't really rely that much on the profile ISF.
okay.
If you got auto-tune on, and the way this algorithm that works, or like that runs below the iAPS interface works, is basically with every loop that it does, or like with every cycle that it does, which is every 5 minutes, there comes a new CGM reading. And with the new CGM reading, that's basically the heartbeat. And then it takes a bunch of things into consideration, your IOB, your current glucose, and then it does predictions. You've seen those 4 lines, right? Or basically it's 5 lines actually, but you've seen the several lines.
Yep.
And depending on certain conditions, it's averaging those multiple lines basically into like one prediction it wants to use. And based on this prediction, it basically decides, okay, I'm going to issue a 0 temporary basal, I'm going to issue a temporary basal that's increased, or I'm going to give you an SMB, which is a super microbolus. And based on this algorithmic choice, you're getting insulin. And so now, while it does that dynamically for Arden now, because you've toggled on the dynamic stuff, so it will also change like every 5 minutes. It may also adjust basically her ISF, and it may adjust her carb ratio, depending on if you toggle that on or not. Basal is very, very, very important in that decision, basically, because it takes your basal profile into consideration when it's doing the whole calculations around if it like whether it should issue a temporary basal or whether it should issue an SMB, and what the dosage of that SMB should be like. If you got auto-tune on, to like come back full circle here, if you got auto-tune on, you have something that that may change Arden's basal every day of the week. So you're now trying to do like math calculations. It's a bit like you're in high school and I give you a math test, and every 5 minutes I come to you and I just rip the paper out of from you, give you a new paper with like new numbers, and you have to restart all over again.
Okay.
That's kind of what happens when you got auto-tune with dynamic on.
So
it's like me shouting at you, giving you new numbers, and expecting you to get perfect results with it. It's like an ever-changing basis.
So it's one or the other. Dynamic settings on or auto-tune on. Not either, not both. But which do you have on?
I have dynamic on. I have never used auto-tune. Okay. Because I know that the basal profile that I have in here is basically really, really well set. If I look at my iAPS when I get up, I'm basically flatlining. Yeah. And I do intermittent fasting, or like, I don't want to call it intermittent fasting, but I usually have like the first meal of the day between like 11:30 and 1 p.m. ish, right? So and I had my last thing to eat at like maybe 10, right? 10 p.m. So there's at least like 10 to 12 hours in there, and I'm usually quite flat in there. So I know my basic settings are pretty well tuned,
right? And
so I don't want something in there that just keeps changing it. And also, yeah, like I know the math behind it to an extent, so I just don't. I want to avoid basically the whole ever-changing thing on like me shouting new numbers for you while you're doing the math test.
Gotcha. Is there a world where being a female that's getting your period, is there a value in like once a week going to the auto-tune and being like, here, do it now, and then like instead of it happening all the time, because you are going to get like, I mean, you're trust me, everyone.
Yeah, I'm aware of what you mean. Like,
yeah, because everyone who doesn't get a period is lucky. But
yeah,
like, you know, you could be 3 or 4 different people every month as far as diabetes is concerned.
So I don't want to give like advice on that kind of stuff, because I am no woman, right? I don't get my period, right? But just from like where I stand and what I know about the algorithm, I still wouldn't tune on auto-tune, because basically the app is taking care of those fluctuations for you.
Okay.
And if you really feel like you're not getting enough insulin, I would just put on like a temp target that just raises you a bit. That like drops you a bit, so to increase the thing. iAPS also got the profiles, so you could use that and just go on like 120% profile if you feel like that. But usually the way this whole thing works, if it sees you are more resistant, it will like lower the ISF number, which basically makes the algorithm more aggressive, and it gives you a bit more insulin.
Yeah.
And the same thing around, right? If the period has ended and you're back to normal, quote unquote, right? You are normal while on period. Sorry, like, don't want to say that, but if like the bodily resistance and insulin needs to go back to normal,
fewer impacts from hormones.
Exactly.
Yes.
If you go back to that, the app should also kind of like sense that to an extent, right? And also what's very important, and I kind of want to like really, really emphasize on that while being on here with you. None of the applications that we currently have apart from a very specific sub-branch of Android APS, which I'm not going to get into because I don't really know a lot about it, they do not learn. People talk about
Learning.
dynamic ISF in iAPS or the other apps, and it's learning how you function and that kind of stuff. It doesn't learn. It is not a machine learning thing. It doesn't do like neural networks. It doesn't do machine learning or artificial intelligence. What it does is it looks at your total daily delivery insulin, right, from between the past hour to up to 14 days in different like weightings, right? And it averages that basically and based more or less on your insulin usage.
Yeah, it uses that history
stuff. Yes.
To decide how to do the math.
Exactly. Right, but it doesn't learn in any kind of way.
Yeah.
And also if you jump onto the app and you want to toggle on the dynamic, it'll actually tell you the first 24 hours it can't do it because it doesn't have enough data.
So I want to be clear too. I don't think auto-tune's on Arden's. I just wanted to have the conversation. Okay. But you scared me enough that I'll double check.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you.
No, not scared in a bad way. So let me ask a different question about iAPS.
Yes.
What about the people, I've had one of them on here, who tell me, I'm on iAPS, I don't even bother bolusing for meals. I can't figure that one out.
I can't really tell you how they do it. A lot of the people that do that, they have very, very aggressive settings, right? And so they may or may not run into specific issues around unannounced exercise. So if you just it gave a bunch of insulin because it sensed that you were eating, and then suddenly you decide to, oh, you know what, I'm going to go to the gym after all, right? So they might have to cover all the IOB, the insulin on board with a quick snack or whatever. A lot of the people that also do full closed looping have a long history of basically diabetes, and they have fine-tuned the living S out of their settings.
Yeah.
So a lot of people hear about these kind of algorithms, and iAPS isn't the only one. They hear about these kind of apps, and then they hear about certain people that, they are FCL, so full closed loop, and they don't bolus, they just start eating, and the app takes care of that, and then they go I want that. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. It's basically like you saying, you looking at the sky and you seeing an airplane and you going, oh, I want to fly that, and expecting to, just because you board a 747, you can just fly it. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work that way.
Right. It takes a decade for you to figure it out.
Yeah, it takes a decade and a long time educating yourself and becoming a pilot and getting a license and, getting trained on that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's similar around that with FCL. What I personally do, I'm not going to lie, I'm not FCL, right, by any means. I might or might not announce my meals. So sometimes I don't really feel like it. Sometimes I put in something. It's always eyeballed, right? I don't really weigh that much of my stuff.
Yeah.
And I do a pre-bolus every single time. So I do a pre-bolus, but I will only do a pre-bolus if it's a bigger meal. Mm-hmm. So if I just want to have an apple, which is between 15 to 30 grams of carbs, depending on, the size of apple and how sweet it is.
Yeah.
I might not even announce it, and I might not even bolus for it. Okay. But if I'm sitting at work and I feel oh my God, I need a coffee and 2 Snickers because this problem I'm working on right now is really bad, I will give myself, 1 or 2 units just to get things going. Mm-hmm. And, that's how I use the app. So I'm kind of hands off, but I'm not entirely hands off.
It's interesting to hear you talk about it the way I think about it. Get things going, throw some insulin in there, get it on our side.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think how you have to think about it. I had one other question about this.
Sure.
I find it heavily manages with boluses and taking away basal.
Yeah, but
I can see long segments of zero basal with good blood sugars.
That's because how the algorithm, which is it's the OREF algorithm, which comes from an application you might or might not know. It's called the OpenAPS algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
It's invented by Dana Lewis and Scott Lebrand.
Yep, they've been on the podcast years ago.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So it basically uses a version of that heavily adjusted and heavily built on stuff on that, but it the basic algorithm I want to say is OREF. And OREF does that thing that I explained earlier, which is it takes certain metrics every 5 minutes and it does those 5 predictions, and then it depending on certain conditions of those predictions, it does averages of those predictions, and then it comes out with the quote unquote final prediction, and then it doses based on that. Mm-hmm. And that entire algorithm is heavily based on super microboluses. So, and that's why you see a lot of time spans during the day where the user might not be getting basal.
Yeah.
But that's usually around glucose fluctuation and usually also involves food. So, for example, like when I go to bed, I don't have an SMB between like midnight and 6 a.m.
Yeah, that's all basal.
I only have like slight temporary basal adjustments upwards, maybe, but I usually don't get an SMB.
Yeah.
But the minute I wake up and I have a coffee, and I usually spike quite badly on the coffee, even though I drink it black or just with like a splash of milk, I see SMBs going in, boom, 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 boom.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just the way the algorithm works.
Yeah.
The algorithm basically decides on, is it okay if I just do a mild temporary basal, so a mild increase of the profile basal, or do I need to give a super microbolus? And then also there's this thing with OREF, which is like, I don't want to say it like this, but I'm going to say it. It kind of borrows basal, but not in that you're not getting insulin, but it basically looks at your current basal, and then depending on certain settings, it looks at like what is your basal profile right now and what may it be in so and so many minutes. And it kind of takes that number as a basis for the calculations.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's so super fucking important. And sorry for swearing, but it really is important that you have a really, really good basal profile, even though you may not be seeing basal being dosed.
Mm-hmm.
Because it takes that number as like a calculation basis. Right. And that's why I was saying don't use autotune, because it keeps changing that basis, basically.
When it gives you one of those super micro boluses, it's already thinking about, here, take what you need, plus let me throw some of this basal in too. And then it'll manage backwards with a lower basal.
To an extent. It'll often do like a temporary basal of 0. So like you would call it zero temping out or zero temping.
Mm-hmm.
Because it kind of knows, okay, you are currently on 1 unit of basal for the current hour, and you need this much insulin. So I'm going to temp basal you 0 for the next so many minutes because I gave you this much insulin. And then if you rise more and more and more, because maybe you've ate something or whatever, it factors other things in, and then it may give you more insulin. But if it just gives you a correction, for example, and it may take that away. It's very math heavy, and it's a lot of calculations in the background, and I don't want to like say false things. To go back to your question, I'm sorry, I'm kind of going over things.
No, you're fine.
It is a very normal thing to be seeing like a bolus basal distribution of around like, I don't know, like 10 to 90 or like 15 to 85. Right. Especially, and also, I also want to add that personal side note here, and to the listeners or whatever. If you got an endo and you're on one of these systems, or even if you're on 0.5 and the endo goes like, you need a basal bolus distribution of 50-50, tell him to fuck himself. Because that is such an antiquated like way of thinking about this. Right. Because at the end of the day, this is insulin in your body. And you as a healthy person, your pancreas doesn't think like, oh, I'm going to give Scott 0 point something of basal now, and now he just stuffed a donut in his face, and I'm going to give him a bolus. Yeah. It'll just secrete insulin. Right. Personally, I think that we really need to stop thinking about like things like that, and try to basically apply thinking of like a healthy pancreas to diabetics.
Right.
It is insulin in your body, and you need insulin in your body, and we just make up these things and these systems to like make it easier for diabetics and like the people that go through it. But still, it's insulin.
Even when you talk about Omnipod 5, like when you first started up, they want you like 50-50, but within 36 to 48 hours, the pump's making completely different decisions that probably don't look anything like that. But it needs that on day one.
Yeah.
And you're right. As far as antiquated goes, it's just the way that people, like you mentioned earlier, I was over basaled. When you were with an older doctor, he had your basal up high because that's how they used to think about it. Like, we'll give them extra basal because we know they're not going to bolus for their food. Like, and then all of a sudden that becomes like a rule, and no one knows how it became a rule. You know what I mean? And then on and on and on. But these algorithms are not, like, you're right. Like, the settings have to be right, and they need the autonomy to work within the good setting. But then the ratio in which you get insulin from bolus to basal, it could look nonsensical to you, like to the naked eye, but it's working. It's so,
Sometimes I think about like apps like iAPS or Loop or Android APS, right? Because they may do some things differently, but ballpark, they're more or less similar. The same.
Yeah.
I sometimes think about them like a German Shepherd on my side, but on a leash, right? He may bark at you, and if I let it go run, it might hunt a deer for me, or it might do aggressive things if I let it do it.
Right.
But if I say here and if I say come, it's going to come back, right? Because it's a very, very well trained German Shepherd on my leash, basically.
Yeah.
And it's super important that I kind of let it run and let it roam to an extent, but also to kind of know what is happening. That's the thing. And that's also why iAPS is a very non-beginner friendly application in my personal opinion, and why beginners shouldn't be getting onto that application, despite certain issues with that whole ecosystem right now, because essentially you need to really understand diabetes well. Because as a new beginner, especially with things like dynamic ISF and dynamic carb ratios and AutoSense adjusting stuff for you, you might not be realizing if things are actually going wrong or if the app is behaving the way it's behaving.
Mm-hmm.
Like the amount of people that come to the Loop and Learn group and go like, it's taking basal away right now, but I am at 220. Why is it doing that? And then you go like, yeah, but it's just given you like 10 SMBs over the past 50 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. So you got your insulin, but it's taking basal away. I need my basal. No, you need to understand how it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And and I don't want to say like, I don't want to sound like a teacher, pointing the finger up, but it's important that people understand what they kind of use, because with these types of applications, they do give you insulin, right? And you kind of need to understand them.
It's pretty important.
So, yeah.
No, I agree. I do see once in a while, if Arden gets a stuck higher blood sugar, if you manually push the basal, even sometimes just for 20 minutes, you can break that high blood sugar without causing a low. And if you left it alone, it'll stay stuck there. So, but it's a very infrequent thing that I can't put my finger on exactly when it's happening or why it's happening. It happens sometimes. You know what I mean?
Yep. Usually when I go hypo on this application, it's when I think I'm smarter than it.
Oh, okay.
When I look at it and I see, okay, it just gave me 6 SMBs and I have like 15 grams of carbs on board, but I'm already at, I don't know, 2 point something IOB. And I decide like, I'm at 161. I'm going to give like half a unit. And then I do stuff. And then like, 30 minutes later, I'm suddenly like 2 arrows, like double arrows down.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh dang.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have done that half unit. I should have known better. And it's the funny thing. I know how this works, and I still fall victim to that kind of thinking sometimes. And then I just give the half unit, and then then you have like a sip of juice, or I don't know, right? But it's I don't know. It's a human thing. I think it's like I am the human here. I know better.
I'll figure it out, and then it's like, no, you were wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Dan, this has been terrific. I'd like to at some point in the future to talk like more nuts and bolts about how the algorithm works.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. But for now, this was really good. Did we miss anything that you wanted to talk about today? I mean, we started off very oddly talking about your relationship with your parents, which I didn't think was going to happen at all. But I think we've gone on a little bit of a journey. So I feel like we've done a good job.
We did. Yeah, we did. Yeah. No, I don't know if I might plug them. I already plugged them before, but I'm going to say it again. If you guys are like, if there are guys out there that want to get into DIY looping with on iOS, because it's kind of iOS centric, but we help on all systems. There's the Loop and Learn Facebook group. There's also a website, loopandlearn.org. We're a happy bunch of people from all time zones all around the world. So we are literally 24/7, 365 around questions. We also provide much of the like built infrastructure for iOS Loop and also for iAPS. So if you're building these kind of apps, you're using tools that we provide on like a volunteer basis. If I also may plug another organization, if you want to donate and help out people, I may ask to donate for the Night Scout Foundation.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the DIY space know Night Scout because it's that cool tool that you can view sugars on, and that uses CGM data. And if you're on one of these apps, you can also see the insulin going in. But what many don't know is that the NSF isn't just keeping the Night Scout ecosystem alive. They also pay for pay developers pay for like testing devices. So for example, I know a developer that got an iPhone. Got some money for an iPhone to test things by the NSF. I was given some money to go to a conference in San Diego last November by the NSF. So if there are people out there that can spare $1 or $2, donate it to the ISF.
Right.
That's a cool thing for us. And apart from that, no. I don't have any more things to say, man. I really enjoyed being here.
I did too. It's funny how much of what we use I don't even understand. Like, I know that's odd. Like, I know I pay somebody every month to house something. I don't even know what it is. Like information somewhere. And then somebody's like, oh, you could use this one or that one. I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's working, so I'm not touching it. But I don't know. Like, I know how important, like, the Night Scout Foundation is. I don't know why. Is it funny? Like, I'm like, I mean, I know we need it to work. But it's the give and take between having something centralized and controlled by a company, and how important that is for so many different ideas. But if you do it this way and it's, community based and open sourced,
Yeah.
Well, then you keep everything keeps moving forward because it's not a business. You're not like, oh, we got there. We're selling it. People like it. It's good. Leave it like this. You're like, oh, let's make it better. Let's improve. Let's hear from other people.
Yeah.
So both aspects of it have real positives, and then they both have negatives too. If we just said to a company, just go take this algorithm, make a pump with it.
Yeah.
Right. I bet you I'd know about where my data is being housed and I'd understand what all is happening, and that would all be very smooth for me.
Yeah.
But they'd probably also sit on the algorithm for 5 years and not do anything with it. And so, you know what I mean? Like
I would have a very funny story. I don't think we have enough time for it, but I was at this conference last November, and a guy from Medtronic was there, and he was basically presenting I think they called something about missed meals. I don't want to mispronounce the name they have for it, right? But the 780 basically has a missed meal function. And another very known DIY veteran went up to him and asked him, hey, what you presented today, it sounds a whole lot like the unannounced meal feature in the ORF algorithm. He didn't say much, but the face that he gave and the expression basically said a lot, right? Mm-hmm. And we were standing in a crowd, and everyone kind of just chuckled and knew. Right. It was those kind of moments where you go okay.
Yeah. Now, there's got to be a blend of it.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is. Obviously, I'm pretty far on the outside of it, but I think of my job around algorithms, like do-it-yourself algorithms, is I think I'm doing the thing I can do for it, which is to let people talk about it and let people hear about it. Yeah. I mean, there's this one thing. I'm always disappointed at the limitations of Facebook because I see Loop and Learn, that Facebook group's a great example. If there was a way that I could start a suite of Facebook groups and fold things, not that they would want me to, but just supposing out loud, if you could have you remember how old boards used to work? Mm-hmm. There was a tree on the left, and it was here, we're going to talk about black and this one, white and this one, green and this one, purple and this one. And you could if you could do that in Facebook.
Yeah, like a message board.
Like
a proper message board.
Oh my God,
channels.
like a message board. Yeah. Then you could fold these things together, and then you would have Loop and Learn's a great Facebook group. But you're not touching the number of people I am and the kind of traffic I am. Imagine if those conversations could happen in front of more people, how much more quickly it might expand. Yeah. But that doesn't exist. So everything's a give and take. I don't know. I just went down a weird road there, but everything's a give and take. And there's moments where I wish we could go faster in some spots. And there's moments when I wish there was more money involved in some things. Yeah. And I mean organizational structured money and, that kind of thinking. Anyway, it's all working pretty well. It's hard to argue with it, but
it's working pretty well. And, all the money, it always comes with strings attached, right? So the thing is, I think what we got right now, it works pretty well. Mm-hmm. And I've got this for 27 years now. Arden's going on, I don't know, close to 20, I guess.
Oh God,
I don't know, 18 or something. Anyways,
point
I'm trying to make is I was diagnosed in the last millennia, and I was told in the next 5 years there's a cure. And I've talked to so many diabetics that had diabetes for 60, 65 years, and even back then they were told, guys, in 5 to 10 years there's going to be a cure.
It's coming.
So it's what we got here is pretty awesome, and
it's amazing.
The space I am in is basically improved and driven and by volunteers, and that put countless hours every week into this. And I hope it stays healthy for a long time until it's not needed anymore, essentially.
Oh, Dan, listen, I'll go through them all. Medtronic 670G, Tandem Control IQ X2, Omnipod 5, Loop, iAPS, Android 8,
iAPS,
all of it.
Ed Damiano's iLet, the bionic pancreas.
Oh, the new
right?
iLet, the bionic. Right. These things, as long as you understand basic concepts of diabetes, have access to insulin, a CGM, the stories about people like my friend Mike, they're not going to exist anymore. This is it. We're running at this point.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. All right, I'll let you go. I don't. What time is it where you are?
It's 8:03. So 8:03.
It's okay. To bed. Yeah, you're 31. You're going to fall asleep soon. You're very old.
Oh no, I'm going to head to the gym now, and then when I'm back, I'm going to eat, and then I'm going to go to bed. Because I've just sat on a podcast with you for 2 hours. I got to move.
You got to get. Oh yeah, trust me, I'm getting up as soon as I get done speaking too. Hold on for me 1 second. A huge thanks to a longtime sponsor, Touched by Type 1. Please check them out on Facebook, Instagram, and at touchedbytype1.org. If you're looking to support an organization that's supporting people with type 1 diabetes, check out Touched by Type 1. A huge thanks to the Contour NextGen blood glucose meter for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Learn more and get started today at contournext.com/juicebox. Did you know if just one person in your family has type 1 diabetes, you're up to 15 times more likely to get it too? So screen it like you mean it. One blood test can spot type 1 diabetes early. Tap now, talk to a doctor, or visit screenedfortype1.com for more info. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. The episode you just heard was professionally edited by Wrong Way Recording. WrongWayRecording.com.